Picture the death strip that used to run alongside the Berlin Wall. Raked sand, floodlight towers, a wire strung tight between two posts. Clipped to that wire by a steel ring is a dog, free to sprint its length the instant it hears movement, and otherwise left alone in the open, day and night, in whatever the weather is doing. It isn't there to be admired. It's there because a government decided that a strip of ground between two fences needed a living alarm system, and that a dog was cheaper, faster, and harder to bribe than a soldier. That dog is the ancestor of what enthusiasts today call the DDR Shepherd, sold now as the toughest, healthiest, most incorruptible version of the German Shepherd ever produced. Some of that reputation is earned. A surprising amount is marketing built on top of a genuinely brutal piece of Cold War infrastructure. This is the story of a dog designed not by breeders chasing a look, but by a state chasing a border it could never quite make secure enough. To understand the DDR Shepherd, start with the fact that it isn't really a separate breed at all. It's a German Shepherd dog. Full stop. The same animal Max von Stephanitz began shaping in 1899 out of German herding stock, built around one idea: usefulness over beauty. For the first 4 decades of the breed's existence, that was that. One dog, one standard, one club. Then the country the dog came from stopped being one country. In May 1949, the 3 Western occupation zones merged into the Federal Republic of Germany. 5 months later, the Soviet-controlled Eastern Zone answered by declaring itself the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the DDR. The line drawn between them split a breed registry along with the nation. In the West, the Verein für Deutsche Schäferhunde, the SV, kept running things the way it always had. Independent clubs, independent breeders, a show ring increasingly rewarding angulation and flash. In the East, there was no equivalent civilian body left standing to hand the breed to. So the state took it. That's the detail flattened in most retellings, and it's the one that explains everything else about this dog. East Germany didn't inherit a breeding program, but nationalized one. In 1946, before the DDR formally existed, the Soviet occupying authority had already stood up a border police force, the Grenzschutzpolizei, later folded into the Grenztruppen, who would spend the next 4 decades guarding roughly 1,378 kilometers of frontier with West Germany, plus the Berlin Wall itself. Within a year, that force numbered in the thousands, and every one of those kilometers needed eyes that didn't blink. Human sentries couldn't cover it alone, so the border troops built a second canine border guard. Along the death strip, kennels and runs were installed roughly every few hundred meters. In Berlin alone, somewhere near 200 separate dog positions. Many dogs weren't handled in the conventional sense at all. They were clipped to a running line between 2 anchor points, free to sprint its length the instant they heard or smelled movement, otherwise left alone in the open. Some former handlers describe a deliberately sparse feeding schedule, once every several days, on the theory that hunger kept an animal sharper. Whatever the intention, the effect was a corridor patrolled by animals kept permanently on the edge of their own endurance. That's the actual origin of the DDR Shepherd's reputation for toughness. It wasn't built in a show ring, it was built on a wire in the open in Central European winters by an institution that needed a dog capable of surviving conditions no responsible breeder would call humane. What makes the East German program genuinely unusual is how bureaucratic the dog making was. The DDR didn't just want tough dogs, it wanted predictable ones. And predictability, to a planned economy, meant paperwork. The instrument was something called the Wertmessziffer, literally value measurement number, a scoring system formalized through the Ministry of the Interior from the late 1950s onward, assigning every breeding-age dog a numerical rating built from a checklist. Bone density, pigmentation, ear set, dentition, structural soundness, and, weighted above all the physical traits, nerve strength and working temperament. A dog that scored badly on any decisive category, hip dysplasia included, was pulled from the breeding pool outright. regardless of what it looked like or who its parents were. The working trials reinforce the same logic. Where a West German dog was tested clearing a 5-foot wall set at an angle, its DDR counterpart scaled a sheer 6-foot vertical face. Where the Western tracking trial ran 8 direction changes, the Eastern one ran 16. East German breeders hadn't found some superior bloodline, the West missed. They were running a stricter filter generation after generation for 4 decades, with almost no outside genetic material crossing the border to dilute it. Isolation, ironically, is what gave the DDR Shepherd its consistency. The same wall that stopped people crossing also stopped genes crossing, and a closed gene pool under relentless selection pressure produces a uniform animal, whether or not that was the intended lesson. Run that selection process for 40 years, and the physical result is genuinely distinct from the Western showline German Shepherd, even though the paperwork calls them the same breed. DDR dogs run larger and heavier boned than their Western counterparts, with broader skulls, deeper chests, and a top line that stays essentially level rather than sloping toward the hindquarters the way the modern showline does. Pigmentation runs darker as a rule. Deep sables and near black saddles are common, a trait breeders point to as evidence of stronger, more original working line genetics. Though coat color was never itself the point. It was a byproduct of the same tightly controlled gene pool that fixed structure and temperament. That claim about hip dysplasia deserves the same honesty. It's repeated on nearly every DDR lineage breeder's website as settled fact: low incidence, superior joints, and there's a real mechanism behind it. Any dog that failed a hip evaluation was removed from the program, which over decades will genuinely suppress a heritable condition in a closed population. But the claim also does a lot of marketing work for modern kennels selling puppies at a premium and DDR line. Today usually means a dog several generations removed from actual East German soil, bred under nothing like the state oversight that produced the original selection pressure. The filter that built the reputation stopped running in 1990. What sold under the name now is descended from it, not identical to it. Temperament is where myth and reality diverge most sharply, and where the honest version of this dog is more interesting than the cliché. Popular framing casts it as a ferocious attack dog, and the borderline running dogs genuinely could be. But the standard the state enforced was explicit about avoiding over-aggression, because an indiscriminately vicious dog is a liability to its own handler. What the Wertmeister system selected for instead was nerve, a dog that didn't startle, didn't panic under gunfire or floodlights, and could switch off entirely once the job was done. Owners of preservation line dogs today consistently describe an animal watchful and reserved with strangers rather than reflexively hostile, intensely biddable with its own handler, and notably calm in the house, closer to a dog with a very high threshold for arousal than one permanently primed to bite. It's a temperament built for a sentry post, not a fighting pit, and conflating the two is where most of the internet gets this breed wrong. On the 9th of November 1989, the border the entire program existed to guard opened, and within months, the reason for the DDR Shepherd's existence evaporated. Roughly 50,000 border guards were released from duty in the reunification that followed, and the dogs went from state assets to liabilities almost overnight. Some were absorbed into the reunified German police and customs services. Some were sold to handlers and kennels who recognized what they were looking at. A great many were simply put down. A sentry-trained dog with a hard temperament and no job isn't easy to rehome in a country dismantling the entire apparatus it belonged to. What survived did so almost entirely through private hands. Breeders in the former East and across North America and Western Europe who tracked down dogs and paperwork from the last state-run kennels before the lineage thinned any further. A breed engineered from the ground up as an instrument of state control now survives purely because private individuals, with no government oversight whatsoever, decided it was worth keeping alive. The Stasi's dog outlived the Stasi by escaping the state entirely. The DDR Shepherd isn't just a dog with a hard reputation. It's a piece of Cold War infrastructure that happened to be alive, built by an institution that no longer exists for a wall that no longer stands, now living out its second life on the other side of the ideology that made it. I'd just like to give a massive shout out to the Instagram pages who have let me use their clips and images of their dogs in this video. Make sure to give them a follow down below. If you want me to cover any other breed topics, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.